From New York, this is Democracy Now!
The border is closed. We are expelling families. We are expelling single adults. And we've made a decision that we will not expel young, vulnerable children.
The Biden administration moves to close much of the southern border as it holds 15,000 unaccompanied migrant children. The number of asylum seekers shows no sign of slowing down. We'll get the latest and look at how two Trump-supporting Mexicans are fanning the flames at the border.
Two Mexican conspiracy theorists are broadcasting false information out of a migrant camp in Tijuana. Now, hundreds of asylum seekers who already fear for their lives because of death threats in Central America and gang violence in Tijuana have to also contend with the xenophobia, racism, and hostility that these live streamers are inciting on social media.
Plus, we go to Bessemer, Alabama, where Amazon workers are voting on whether to become the first unionized Amazon warehouse in the United States. It's one of the most closely watched union elections in decades.
Working at Amazon warehouse is no easy thing. The shifts are long, the pace is super fast, you are constantly being watched and monitored. They seem to think you are another machine.
We'll speak to Stuart Applebaum, president of the Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union. While Amazon is fighting the unionization drive, the company's CEO, Jeff Bezos, has made $65 billion over the past year during the pandemic. That's an average of over $7 million an hour. And a mass shooting at a supermarket in Boulder, Colorado, has taken 10 lives. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Boulder, Colorado, a gunman opened fire without warning at a supermarket Monday afternoon, killing 10 people. Witnesses described a horrific scene of bodies littering supermarket aisles as the shooter systematically fired round after round at shoppers without saying a word. Police injured a white male suspect outside the King Soopers grocery store and took him into custody. He has not been identified, and no motive in the killings is known. Among those shot dead was 51-year-old police officer Eric Talley, who was the first on the scene. Resident Stephen McHugh dropped his family members off at the supermarket's pharmacy, where his son-in-law was in line for a COVID-19 vaccine with his two grandchildren. McHugh said the family witnessed people being shot around them and hid in a closet until the police rescued them.
It's not okay that we don't have better gun control laws. Let me just say that. It's not, when it's your family, this has got to stop. Every week in the United States, there's a shooting. Now it's our turn, and that should never be repeated anywhere.
The killer used an AR-15 semi-automatic assault rifle. Just last week, a Colorado state judge blocked Boulder ordinances barring assault weapons and large-capacity magazines, ruling in favor of the National Rifle Association's Colorado affiliate and two Boulder residents. The NRA is in a deeply weakened state. It filed for bankruptcy last year after New York State Attorney General Letitia James sued them for fraud, seeking to dissolve the organization. The Senate Judiciary Committee is holding hearings this afternoon on gun control. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is warning of another rise in COVID-19 cases, with the 7-day average of daily infections up 5% or more in 27 states. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky Monday asked U.S. residents to continue to wear masks to avoid crowds and to delay travel, even if they've been vaccinated.
We are at a critical point in this pandemic, a fork in the road, where we as a country must decide which path we are going to take. We must act now, and I am worried that if we don't take the right actions now, we will have another avoidable surge, just as we are seeing in Europe right now, and just as we are so aggressively scaling up vaccination.
The National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases said Tuesday that drug maker AstraZeneca may have submitted outdated information about its COVID-19 vaccine that provided an incomplete view of efficacy data from a late-stage clinical trial in the U.S. The development could complicate AstraZeneca's application to the Food and Drug Administration for emergency use authorization. Here in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo says all state residents age 50 and older are now eligible for a COVID-19 vaccine. Meanwhile, West Virginia has become the third U.S. state to offer vaccines to all adults, joining Alaska and Mississippi. More than 82 million U.S. residents have received at least one dose of the vaccine, about 1 in 4 people nationwide. The head of the World Health Organization is calling on vaccine makers to license their technologies to other manufacturers, calling growing vaccine inequity a moral outrage. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus called it shocking that some countries are racing to vaccinate their entire populations, including healthy younger people at lower risk of COVID-19, while healthcare workers and older people and others at high risk go unvaccinated in poorer nations.
The gap between the number of vaccines administered in rich countries and the number of vaccines administered through COVAX is growing every single day and becoming more grotesque every day.
Saudi Arabia has proposed a ceasefire to end its 6-year war on Yemen, but Houthi rebels have rejected the deal, saying the Saudis must first fully lift its devastating blockade, which has led to the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Shortly before proposing the ceasefire, Saudi forces carried out air raids, striking dozens of targets in Yemen, including a grains port. In news from Bangladesh, a massive fire in a Rohingya refugee camp has killed at least 15 people and displaced 50,000. Al Jazeera reports 400 people remain missing. The fire began in a camp in Cox's Bazar, then spread to 2 others, destroying thousands of shelters. Nearly 1 million Rohingya refugees live in southern Bangladesh after fleeing a military crackdown in Burma in 2017. It was the 3rd fire at the camps in recent days. One survivor told Reuters, quote, "When we were in Burma, they destroyed everything. Now it's happened again." At least 137 people have been killed in Niger after gunmen on motorbikes attacked villages near the border of Mali. It was the deadliest attack in the West African nation in years. The coordinated raids occurred Sunday, on the same day Niger's constitutional court confirmed newly elected President Mohamed Bazoum's victory. Back in the United States, the Senate has confirmed Boston Mayor and former union leader Marty Walsh to be Secretary of Labor. Walsh becomes the first Labor Secretary to come from a union background in nearly 50 years. With Walsh's confirmation, Boston City Council President Kim Janey has become interim mayor of Boston, making her the first woman and first person of color to hold the office. The White House is preparing a $3 trillion infrastructure and jobs package as part of President Biden's Build Back Better agenda. Washington Post reports the legislation will be broken into 2 parts. One package will focus on education and programs to increase the participation of women in the workforce, including paid leave, universal pre-K, and free community college. It would also extend the child tax credit for several years. A second part of the legislation will focus on infrastructure like bridges, roads, and waterways. It would reportedly provide $400 billion to combat climate change, including $60 billion for green transit. In comparison, Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Elizabeth Warren recently proposed a bill that would invest $500 billion in electric public transportation infrastructure. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona has canceled $1 billion in student loans for more than 70,000 people defrauded by for-profit colleges. The decision reverses a move by former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos to limit student loan relief for people impacted by the collapse of for-profit colleges like Corinthian and ITT Technical Institute. Louis DeJoy, the Trump-appointed Postmaster General, is unveiling a sweeping austerity plan for the U.S. Postal Service to reduce postal office hours, increase postage prices, and slow down mail delivery. This comes just days after 50 House Democrats wrote to President Biden urging him to fire the entire Board of Governors of the United States Postal Service, which has the sole power to remove DeJoy from his job. Federal investigators are weighing whether to charge people who joined the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol with seditious conspiracy, the crime of seeking to overthrow the government. The Justice Department has not successfully prosecuted a sedition case in over 2 decades. This comes as prosecutors are preparing to discuss plea deals with some 300 suspects charged over the January 6th assault, which left 5 people dead. Over the weekend, Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson made headlines when he falsely claimed the January 6 rioters were not violent.
One of the reasons I'm being attacked is because I've very honestly said I didn't feel threatened on January 6th. I didn't. There was much more violence on the House side. There was no violence on the Senate side.
Former President Trump's lawyer, Sidney Powell, sought to dismiss a $1.3 billion defamation lawsuit filed against her by Dominion Voting Systems, saying no one should have believed her repeated false claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election. In a court filing, Powell's lawyers write, quote, "No reasonable person would conclude that the statements were truly statements of fact," unquote. The Supreme Court's agreed to consider the Justice Department's request to reinstate a death sentence for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who's serving life in prison for his role in the deadly 2013 Boston Marathon bombing. Last year, a lower court tossed out his death sentence, but the Trump Justice Department appealed. And in Atlanta, the husband of a woman who died in last week's mass shootings has revealed he was handcuffed and held by police for 4 hours after surviving the attack. Mario Gonzalez said, quote, "I don't know whether it's because of the law or because I'm Mexican. The simple truth is that they treated me badly." He didn't learn his wife, Delana Ashley Yawn, had died for hours. Gonzalez and his wife had gone to the spot together for massages and were in separate rooms when the gunman opened fire. They had married over the summer and had a baby girl. A total of 8 people died in the attacks on 3 Asian-owned spas last Tuesday. 7 of the victims were women, including 6 women of Asian descent. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York City, joined by my co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, photos released Monday show migrant children crowded into holding areas separated by plastic sheeting in a temporary processing center near the U.S.-Mexico border in Donna, Texas. There's no social distancing in effect as the children huddle on plastic mattresses covered with foil sheets. The photos were shared by Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar of Texas with the news site Axios. Cuellar said 8 pods that were meant to house 260 children were packed beyond capacity, with one pod housing over 400 boys. He said Customs and Border Patrol agents were, quote, "not equipped to care for kids." There are now over 15,000 unaccompanied migrant children in U.S. custody as the number of asylum seekers at the southern border shows no sign of slowing down. Over 5,000 of those are being held in Customs and Border Protection jails. Axios reports over 800 children have been jailed for over 10 days, more than a 4-fold increase over the past week. This comes as the Washington Post reports CBP has requested airplanes to transport asylum seekers from the southern border to sites near the Canadian border for processing. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas appeared on multiple news shows over the weekend to say the U.S. border is effectively closed.
The border is closed. We are expelling families. We are expelling single adults. And we've made a decision that we will not expel young, vulnerable children.
Mayorkas says officials are rebuilding systems the Trump administration tore down. But Republicans have tried to blame the new administration for the emergency with migrant children's welfare. During an interview Monday with former President Donald Trump, Fox News host Harris Faulkner falsely reported Mayorkas had resigned after less than 7 weeks on the job.
The DHS Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, has resigned, Mr. President.
Well, I'm not surprised. Good. That's a big victory for our country.
Hold on. Let me stop. Let me stop. Let me listen to my team one more time. Forgive me. Forgive me. That has not happened.
That has not happened. For more, we're joined by Luz Lopez, senior supervising attorney with the Immigrant Justice Project with the Southern Poverty Law Center. She came to the United States as a 10-year-old refugee with her family from El Salvador, which she writes about in her op-ed for the New York Times headlined, "Migrant Children Deserve Better." Welcome to Democracy Now!, Luz. It's great to have you with us. So if you can respond to what's happening on the border, not under President Trump, but under President Biden, and if you can fold in your own experience and history and what needs to be done.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, and to you as well, Juan. It truly is an honor to be here, and thank you for the space. So what is happening at the southern border is shameful. We as a country should remain vigilant and hold any administration accountable, regardless of political party, with respect to our treatment of children seeking refuge, who are fleeing countries that are in turmoil, largely because of our geopolitical policies over the past several decades. And with respect to how this mirrors our journey, my family's journey to the United States, it really breaks my heart, Amy, that when we came to the U.S. in 1980, I was accompanied by my parents and my brother. My father had received a death threat. He was a teacher, so was my mother. We were forced to flee El Salvador. The United States was funding a war, was funding the military that was killing thousands of people. And we fled. We left everything we had, everyone we knew, our loved ones, our family, and set for the U.S., where we had family in New York. If we had fled under the conditions that exist now, I very likely would have never had the chance to serve for the United States U.S. Department of Justice. I never would have had the chance to sit here with you to talk about how we can do better, and we must do better for these children and these families. You know, one of the things that concerns me the most is that while we, recognize that the new administration, the Biden administration, has made some positive impact and overtures to ensure that there is a fairer process. For example, they have revoked, I should say, the law that the memorandum that had required ICE and ORR, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which generally processes unaccompanied minors, unaccompanied children who come to the U.S. Seeking asylum. There had been this process in place where these two federal agencies shared information that had a chilling effect on many of the sponsors and family members who were seeking to reunite with these children, because ICE was using this process that should be full of hope and should be humane as a means to identify and deport people, those sponsors who were seeking to reunite with their family members. So we do recognize that the Biden administration has made some taken some positive action, but the fact remains that children continue to come to the U.S. trying to seek refuge and solace and comfort away from the horrible situations that we find in the Northern Triangle, in Guatemala, in El Salvador, and in Honduras, and in Mexico, of course. And what we as a country and what we would like to hold the Biden administration accountable for are policies that are humane, that are family and child-centered. We have the means, Amy, to be more efficient in terms of reuniting families and children at the border with their hosts here in the U.S. The Biden administration themselves acknowledged that 80% of folks or more who come to the border come because there is a relative, there is someone waiting for that person or that family here in the U.S. So instead of spending millions and millions of dollars on CBP and ICE temporary shelters, makeshift shelters for children and families, we can actually divert those funds to ensuring a quicker, more efficient process through which we can reunite these families with their sponsors, these children with their sponsors who are family members, who are trusted people, and who are waiting for them here in the U.S.
Luz, I wanted to ask you, in terms of, you mentioned when your family came in 1980, you and your family, but even back then, even in the midst of civil wars in Central America, the United States granted very few Salvadorans and Guatemalans refugee status or asylum from those countries. What are the conditions that you feel warrant the asylum status now for those who are coming across the border, even if there are nominally no conflicts existing in Central America right now?
Thank you for the question, Juan. Well, anyone who is familiar with the present situation in what this country calls the Northern Triangle, in Honduras, Guatemala, and in El Salvador, knows that there is rampant crime, corruption. Children, adults are being murdered. There is lawlessness and terror in these countries. And a lot of it goes back to, as I mentioned, that these geopolitical games that the United States used to play during the Cold War, which have left these nations without infrastructure and without really any government structure that favors democracy. And as a result, we have children who are fleeing crime, certain death at the hands of gangs, and of a corrupt government, or a government that may, governments that may lack the means to protect their own citizens. It is quite lawless. My family, I still have family in El Salvador, and each day things get worse because COVID, of course, has exacerbated the situation. There is a growing desperation. And while we don't want to play into the narrative that there is this, surge, and we don't want to spread any misinformation, we know that the rate of children, families, of persons who are coming to the U.S. has been steady. It has not suddenly spiked. It has been steady over the past year, not coincidentally, because of COVID. And that has exacerbated these conditions in the Northern Triangle, where crime, there is no protection for families, for children. There are very few jobs. The economies in Latin America are collapsing because of what is happening due to the pandemic, and things were bad before. So we need to be cognizant that many of the families, the people who are fleeing, are doing so because of past policies that need to be remedied. yes, we must hold the Biden administration accountable for working with those governments to ensure that folks in these areas are actually safe, that they have access to the vaccine, which, in El Salvador, a country of millions, less than 30,000 people have begun to be vaccinated. So there are a lot of factors, of human factors, that are driving children and families here. And these are not new factors, as you point out. But what is new is that this country has, in some ways, lost its soul. Well,
Luz, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the this so-called surge that has been much reported of late, how much of that is actually, from what you can tell, new waves of migrants coming from the Northern Triangle, and how many of those are people who have been shut out over the last several years by the Trump administration and effectively dumped in Mexico right across the border, and now think that with the new Biden administration, there'll be an opportunity to have their cases reconsidered or their chances reconsidered?
That's a really good question, Juan. I don't have data that would indicate one way or another whether the number of folks who are coming are primarily folks who stayed in Mexico, who were not permitted to access the asylum process that the U.S. is responsible, for ensuring under international and domestic law. We have an asylum process in place that we seem to ignore. So I don't have data in terms of who were folks who remained in Mexico through that Trump-era policy where we completely abandoned the asylum process and did not even process the numbers of folks that we needed to. We asked people to stay and await, their number so that they could seek asylum. That was unprecedented. We had never done that. But we do know that there is not a surge. There is data by the American Immigration Council that shows the numbers have been fairly steady for the past year. And what we are seeing, unfortunately, that worries me, that concerns the communities that serve these children and families, is that we are sort of reverting to some of the Trump-era practices where we are not pushing for means to efficiently, to quickly unite children and families with their U.S. sponsors that have been waiting for them.
Luz Lopez, we're going to have to leave it there, but 10 more seconds.
I have hope. There are progressive members of Congress that understand, that are willing to work with community organizations to ensure that children are protected and that we remain true to what the values of this country, what we tell the world the values of this country are.
And as you write in your article, that children should be treated as children. Luz Lopez, thanks so much for being with us, Senior Supervising Attorney with the Southern Poverty Law Center. When we come back, we'll be joined by the award-winning investigative journalist Jean Guerrero, who just wrote a piece, "The MAGA Clowns Making Chaos at the Border Have Ugly Pasts." Stay with us. Summer 78 by Claire Pitchett and Jan Tiersen. This is Democracy Now!, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We look now at how two Mexican social media influencers who are devoted Trump supporters have been spreading false conspiracy theories about the ongoing crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border, warning their viewers in the United States of an orchestrated invasion and child trafficking funded by Democrats. Sound QAnon-y? Well, an explosive new report published Monday in the Daily Beast by reporter Jean Guerrero reveals one of the men was deported after serving time in prison for a federal drug trafficking conviction, but was able to re-enter the U.S. while Trump was president. He's a live streamer named Oscar Ramirez, or Oscar Blue, who calls himself an independent reporter and was featured on Trump's former chief strategist Steve Bannon's podcast War Room several times this month. Ramirez also contributes to a U.S. right-wing media network called Real America's Voice. This is a clip from one of his reports.
All the way over here, they put a wall to protect the United States and to protect this invasion that is happening. So it was amazing.
So that's Oscar Ramirez, or Oscar Blue. Just this past April, Ramirez reportedly re-entered the U.S. at the El Paso, Texas border crossing, along with Anthony Acero, another right-wing influencer who allegedly took part in the January 6th insurrection and is a close friend of the QAnon conspiracy theorist Congressperson Marjorie Taylor Greene. Well, if you're having a little trouble following this, let's go to Jean Guerrero, investigative journalist and author of Hate Monger, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda. She has this new piece in the Daily Beast headlined, "The MAGA Clowns Making Chaos at the Border Have Ugly Pasts." Jean, welcome back to Democracy Now! Just lay out what you have found. This is explosive.
Yes, I mean, I looked at the cases of two of these right-wing influencers and conspiracy theorists, but Oscar Ramirez is definitely the most shocking case. He is someone who, as you said, Amy, with a federal drug trafficking conviction in his past, which, according to the Immigration and Nationality Act, U.S. federal law on immigration, someone with that kind of conviction would be inadmissible to the United States after deportation, unless he were able to obtain a special visa waiver from the Attorney General himself or the State Department. And so it would be impossible for him to re-enter the United States without basically very strong political connections and or working as an informant. I asked Mr. Ramirez what the details of his visa were. He refused to give them. He accused me and the Daily Beast of promoting child trafficking by trying to expose some of the things that he's involved in. But he, in addition to the tens of thousands of U.S.-based followers that he has and who he's spreading lies to, creating hysteria about alleged trafficking at the border when he himself is, has a federal drug trafficking conviction, it's been incredibly damaging. In addition to that social media following, he's been appearing regularly on a U.S. right-wing media outlet called Real America's Voice, which airs Steve Bannon's program, The War Room, among other things. And I reached out to them about their decision to use a convicted drug trafficker as a talking head on border security and to create hysteria about trafficking at the border, and they declined to respond.
Jean, could you talk also about Anthony Agüero and his ties to right-wing elements in the United States, as well as another person, Paloma Zuniga?
Yes. So Oscar Ramirez, he is close friends and collaborators with Anthony Agüero, as well as Ben Bergquam, who is a correspondent at Real America's Voice. These three men are very close, and both of the U.S.-based men, Ben Bergquam and Anthony Agüero, are close, longtime associates and friends of Marjorie Taylor Greene. They've defended the integrity of the Proud Boys, which is designated a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. They've been involved in a number of right-wing extremist activities in the United States. And there's some speculation that because of Oscar Ramirez's close connections with these individuals, he was able to get connections in the Trump administration. And despite the fact that the the Trump administration was instructing agents not to use their discretion in favor of extending leniency to any immigrant whatsoever, let alone those with criminal convictions. He was able to get a special this special pass to get back into the United States and to report alongside these two individuals for this U.S. right-wing network called Real America's Voice. Paloma for Trump is a U.S. and Mexican national who's also extremely problematic. She has tens of thousands of followers as well. Also associated with Ben Bergquam, the Marjorie Taylor Greene associate. And she has been involved in numerous physical confrontations with the migrants. At one point, she was caught on camera chasing and literally physically shoving a migrant child who was approaching the border with his father to request asylum. She was screaming in his face, chasing him around and shoving him, telling him that he was not welcome in the United States. She's since apologized for that incident, but she remains a problematic character. She's been involved in an incident in which rocks and racial epithets were hurled at the asylum seekers. She very recently went to this migrant camp of thousands of people who were waiting for their turn to request asylum legally in the U.S. and started broadcasting their images, including images of children without their permission, something which makes the asylum seekers very nervous because of their precarious situation in northern Mexico, where many of these people are fleeing death threats. There's gang violence that they have to worry about. They don't want their images broadcast, and these live streamers have been going down there, not respecting their rights to privacy. They've been often they'll interview them under false premises and then mistranslate to their U.S.-based audiences to create more hysteria and to basically conflate all of these asylum seekers with with child traffickers and conflate their advocates with traffickers as well.
And also in terms of some of them, as you report, are engaged in Mexican chauvinism towards Central American refugees?
Yes, exactly. So Oscar Ramirez, he claims that he's only against illegal immigration, but when you look at his videos, I mean, he tells his viewers that Central Americans are quote unquote lazy, and that anyone who is trying to come to the United States through Mexico from Central America is just looking for quote easy money, easy welfare. He peddles these very racist and negative stereotypes about Central Americans, and this is something that's very common. It's an established problem. This internalized racism that can occur in the Latinx community. Although Ramirez and Zuniga deny being racist, but they both have expressed very negative views towards Central Americans, towards people who are coming from other countries who may have darker skin than Mexicans. And it's a very common strategy with people who are peddling white supremacist ideas to use people of color as shields against accusations of racism. So having people like Paloma Zuniga or Oscar Ramirez on these U.S. right-wing media outlets talking about a quote-unquote invasion of horrible people at the border, it helps blunt accusations of racism in these U.S. right-wing media outlets, and further, and just really creates a lot of hysteria and hurts the chances of these asylum seekers to ever find a legal pathway into the United States. I spoke to many of them who say that they're afraid of these live streamers. The live streamers make them really sad and concerned that it might turn public opinion in the United States against immigration and create this hysteria that will ultimately lead them to not be able to find refuge in this country where they're hoping to save their children's lives.
Jean Godetto, we want to thank you so much for being with us. Wrote the Daily Beast piece, which we will link to. The MAGA clowns making chaos at the border have ugly past. Jean is also author of Hate Monger, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, and the White Nationalist Agenda. When we come back, we go to Bessemer, Alabama, where Amazon workers are voting on whether to become the first unionized Amazon warehouse in the United States. Stay with us.
He's just a hero in a long line of heroes, looking for something attractive to save. They say he rode in on the back of a pickup, He's just a hero in a long line of heroes, looking for some lonely billboard to grace. They say he sprung from the skull of Athena. Think about your own head and the headache he gave. He's just a hero in a long line of heroes, looking for action at a price he can pay. They say he's famous, but no one can prove it. Make him an offer just to see what he'll say. Check out the dashboard lights, glowing all green and white. He feels safe in the dark.
Soap Star, Joe by Liz Phair. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. The final week of voting has begun in one of the most closely watched union elections in decades. Amazon workers in Bessemer, Alabama are voting on whether to join the Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union, that's the RWDSU, and become the first unionized Amazon warehouse in the United States. Voting ends March 29th. Ballots have been sent to nearly 6,000 workers, most of whom are black. Amazon has fought labor organizing at the company for decades, but Bloomberg is reporting Amazon workers in Baltimore, New Orleans, Portland, Denver, and Southern California are now also considering launching union drives. Nationwide, Amazon has over 1.3 million employees, making it the second largest private workforce in the United States behind Walmart. The unionization effort in Alabama has attracted widespread support, even from President Biden.
Today and over the next few days and weeks, workers in Alabama and all across America are voting on whether to organize a union in their workplace. This is vitally important, a vitally important choice as America grapples with the deadly pandemic, the economic crisis, and the reckoning on race. What it reveals the deep disparities that still exist in our country. And there should be no intimidation, no coercion, no threats, no anti-union propaganda.
Congress members Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, Terry Sewell, and other lawmakers recently traveled to Bessemer, Alabama to support the unionization drive. Last week, Amazon worker Jennifer Bates, who's helping to organize in Bessemer, testified before the Senate.
We hope with the union we will finally have a level playing field. We hope we will be able to talk to someone at HR without being dismissed. We hope that we will be able to rest more, that there will be change in the facility to make some of the stress off our bodies. We're hoping we get a living wage, not just Amazon's minimum wage, and be able to provide better for our families. We hope that they will start to hear us and see us and treat us like human beings. It's frustrating that all we want is to make Amazon a better place to work. Yet Amazon is acting like they are under attack. Maybe if they spent less time and money trying to stop the union, they would hear what we are saying. And maybe they would create a company that's as good for workers in our community as it is for the shareholders and executives.
Amazon worker Jennifer Bates testifying on Capitol Hill. This comes as a new study out today from Americans for Tax Fairness and the Institute for Policy Studies has found Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos has seen his personal wealth increase by $65 billion since the pandemic began a year ago. That means Bezos' wealth increased on average by over $7.4 million every hour for the past year. Meanwhile, Amazon workers in Bessemer and other locations are being forced to work 10-hour shifts with just 2 15-minute bathroom breaks. We're joined now by two guests. Here in New York, Stuart Applebaum is with us, president of the Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union. And with us in Bessemer, Alabama is Michael Foster, a member and organizer of the RWDSU, who's helping to lead the Amazon unionization drive. He's also a poultry plant worker. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Michael, it's great to have you back. Let's begin with you in Bessemer. In this last week, what message are you putting out, and what are the tactics Amazon is using to fight the unionization effort?
Well, our efforts right now is just to encourage the employees to get their ballots out in the mail, to mail them out, because That's the only way that we can allow our voices to be heard. And Amazon tactics that they're using, instead of steady going around from person to person, telling them, to vote no and just doing a whole bunch of other stuff. They're not having cabinet meetings, but they're going to individuals at a time and telling them these things.
And Stuart Applebaum, I wanted to ask you, these statements by President Biden before the election or as the election is unfolding, I don't recall a president ever making a statement of any party before a major union drive in the country. The impact of that and Biden's stance so far on the right of labor to organize.
Hello, everybody. You're right. It is the most pro-union, pro-worker statement that has ever been made by a president of the United States. And that is so crucial in this election. Amazon is trying to intimidate workers. They want them to be afraid. And what President Biden's statement says is that you may be up against perhaps the most powerful corporation in the world, the wealthiest person in the world, but the President of the United States has your back. And that is crucial for workers to be hearing.
And I wanted to ask you and follow up on that. The National Labor Relations Board, the President Biden won't be able to have a majority on the board until probably later this year because the terms are staggered. But he did appoint a general counsel recently to the NLRB that is much more pro-labor. Could you talk about the impact that that's having on the potential for future union drives?
I'd also mention what it's having on this union drive as well, because labor law in this country is tilted to favor employers and to make it difficult for workers to ever be able to achieve a union. And that's incredibly unfortunate. We saw that the Trump board often sought to make it even worse for workers trying to organize. Lengthening time periods, giving employers more time to try to intimidate and interfere with workers. We need to change the way we conduct union elections in this country, and that means two things. It means we need to have a board composed of people who are going to be supportive of what is the policy of this country, which is to promote collective bargaining and unionization. And it also means that we have to change the laws in this country that now make it so difficult for workers trying to get a collective voice to be able to achieve unionization.
I wanted to turn to journalist Kim Kelly with More Perfect Union, who produced a video report that shows the mail ballot drop box has been placed right in front of the warehouse, even though the National Labor Relations Board said Amazon couldn't have one. This clip starts with Joshua Brewer with the RWDSU.
When you see this box, as you see, it's right by the front door. Everything in Amazon is tracked. Everything is surveilled. So this idea that this massive box that's 20 feet from the front door of Amazon isn't being surveilled is ludicrous. Somebody's lying. So either Amazon is lying or the Postal Service is lying. We tend to believe that Amazon is lying. They've told a lot of lies throughout this process. That went up middle of the night, the second night. Amazon immediately sent out a text message that said, look, the Postal Service installed this box. We don't have keys. We've reached out to the postmaster in Bessemer. We haven't heard back. We've got a Freedom of Information request out there, and we haven't heard back. We've put a lot of pressure on different areas trying to figure out, look, number one, did you even install this box? Or is this Amazon's cluster box? Does the Postal Service own it or not? And then who has the keys? Who actually has access to it? it. Because everything we're reading is showing that the Postal Service doesn't install these boxes.
Even in an apartment complex, the tenant has one, and the mailman, and the rent office. Who knows who has a key to that box?
That was Amazon worker Darryl Craig, that last voice. Michael Foster, talk about the significance of this.
Well, the significance of it is that workers just truly believe that something is going on with this mailing box, that why would Amazon want them to bring their ballots from home and bring it to the plant and put it in their mailbox when they can just literally put it back in their own mailbox? People call me and ask me, is Amazon stealing some of the ballots? Because they have seen people put their ballots in their mailbox, and it's just really scary. I believe it's an intimidation, so to speak.
I wanted to go back to Stuart Applebaum to ask him about the Amazon trumpets a lot on their advertising on television. They're constantly doing ads on television these days talking about their workforce, and they trumpet the fact that they pay $15 an hour. Could you compare with the situation in, let's say, an average Amazon workplace to those of unionized warehouse workers in different parts of America?
Absolutely. Amazon is trying to hide behind a fig leaf of giving $15 an hour, but that wage rate is actually below what unionized warehouses in the area are providing workers. It's also below the median wage in Alabama. It's lowering the median wage, and it's not enough for people to survive on. I also want to remind you that Amazon cut people's wages in the middle of the pandemic. At the end of May, they eliminated the $2 hazard pay they had been giving, even though the pandemic continued to rage, even though the hazards were just as bad, if not worse, as they had been before. And why did they do it? They didn't do it because they needed to. You talked about how much money Bezos has made during this period. They did it because they thought they could get away with it. Oxfam put out a report that said if Jeff Bezos had given every one of his employees a bonus of $105,000, Bezos still would have been wealthier at the end of the pandemic than he was at the beginning. And it's not just wages, it's working conditions. Despite the wage that Amazon pays, it has extraordinary turnover of more than 100% a year because people can't take those jobs at any cost, at the way they're being abused within the workplace. Amazon dehumanizes and mistreats its employees. It breaks them down and uses them up and then just replaces them with other people. The working conditions are terrible. And that's what really needs to change.
I wanted to go to a very significant anniversary, Stuart, that I'm sure you, being a labor leader here in New York, have been observing for years. Thursday marks the 110th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, the deadliest workplace accident in New York City's history, and a seminal moment for American labor. On March 25th, 1911, 146 garment workers, mostly young immigrant women, Jewish and Italian, died after a fire broke out at the factory. Many of them leaped to their deaths when they tried to escape and found the emergency exits locked. I want to play an excerpt of a radio piece I produced 35 years ago in 1986, along with Kathy Doby. It was then the 75th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire.
I worked right near where the fire was. There was cutters there. They were cutting the material. And as soon as they were just going out, it was time to go home. It was 4 o'clock on Saturday.
Pauline Pepe is a 94-year-old survivor of the Triangle fire.
I saw the fire in the tables where they were all filled with lingerie material, you know, and that come up in a flame. When I saw that, I ran out. I went to the door that was closed. I didn't know that was closed. I went there and I found the door closed. I just stood there till they opened it. 40 people going down the steps. We all tumbled one right after another. And I saw people throwing themselves from the window. And as soon as we went down, we couldn't get out because the bodies were coming down. It was terrible.
The women that died that late afternoon were young Jewish and Italian immigrants. When the fire broke out, they tried to escape down the stairs, but found the doors had been locked. The owners believed that given the chance, workers would sneak out with stolen material, and union organizers would sneak in.
Some of the women climbed onto the single fire escape. It collapsed. As onlookers watched, women fell 9 stories to the sidewalk below. Inside the factory, the fire spread quickly, and with no exit left to them, the women climbed through the windows and leapt to their death. While some union members walked in the vigil, others took buses to a Brooklyn cemetery where 7 unidentified triangle victims lie buried. Union members paid their respects and read the stone marker above the women's graves.
In sympathy and sorrow, citizens of New York raised this monument
over the grave of unidentified women and children, who with 139 others
perished by fire in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, Washington Place, March 25th,
March 25th, 1911.
That report done for the 75th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. I interviewed the last survivor of that fire. Now it's the 110th anniversary. Stuart Applebaum, in addition to being president of the Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union, you're a longtime union activist, vice president of the National AFL-CIO. Can you talk about the significance of this moment in history and what it means for today?
The importance of this election in Bessemer, Alabama, transcends this one workplace. It even transcends this one company. It's really about the future of work and how workers are going to be treated in our economy going forward. Whether or not people are going to be abused or whether or not they're going to be treated with dignity and respect. That's why this fight is so important. As Mike can tell you, many workers talk about how they feel like they're being treated as robots being managed by other robots. It's not the way we want workers to be treated. We didn't want them to be treated. They were at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, and we saw what the extraordinarily horrific consequences of that treatment was. And we don't want workers anywhere to be treated the way workers at Amazon are being treated today. Something needs to change. And what the courageous workers in Bessemer, Alabama are doing is standing up for that change. I don't see how we can't be more inspired by all of them.
And Stuart, we only have about 30 seconds left, but I wanted to get your reaction to the approval by the Senate of President Biden's nominee for Secretary of Labor, for Boston Mayor Marty Walsh. The first time in 50 years that a union member, a former union member and leader, is named Secretary of Labor.
I think that's very significant. Joe Biden said when he was running for president that he wanted a union leader to be in his cabinet, and he's delivered on that promise. We have someone who understands what it means to be a working person as the Secretary of Labor, someone who's devoted a good portion of his life to working with unions and trying to make conditions better, and who understands what this is all about. And I'm delighted that Marty Walsh is our new Secretary of Labor.
Stuart Applebaum, we want to thank you for being with us, President, Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union President, and Michael Foster, RWDSU organizer, leading the charge to unionize Amazon's warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama. That does it for our broadcast. There's a job opening at Democracy Now! A senior producer. Check our website. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.